The hospital was quiet. The night was slow, and only a few patients were resting in their rooms. The young nurse sat at her desk, checking files. She thought it would be another long and calm shift. She was wrong. Suddenly, the silence was broken. Sirens screamed in the distance. The sound grew louder and closer. Her heart skipped a beat. An ambulance was rushing in. She stood up quickly, her hands shaking. Something was wrong. The sliding doors burst open, and the ambulance staff ran inside. 3 stretchers rolled through the hallway. The nurse's eyes froze. Her breath caught in her throat. On the stretchers were the people she loved the most, her husband, her sister, and her little son. They were not moving. Their eyes were closed. Their faces were pale like snow. Tubes and wires were attached to them. They looked lifeless. The nurse's legs felt weak. She tried to run toward them. "What happened?" she cried. Her voice cracked with fear. But before she could touch them, a doctor stepped in front of her. He raised his hand firmly. "You cannot see them now," he said in a low, strict voice. She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "But they are my family. That's my husband, my sister, my son." The doctor avoided her gaze. His face was heavy with worry. "Please, wait. The police will explain everything." The police? Her heart pounded harder. Why were the police involved? Was this a crime? An accident? She could not understand. Her hands trembled as the stretchers disappeared behind the emergency room doors. The sound of machines and rushing footsteps echoed inside. She was left standing in the hallway, helpless. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. The seconds felt like hours. The nurse leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. Fear pressed down on her chest like a heavy stone. She had worked in hospitals for years. She had seen pain, death, and blood. But this was different. This was her family. Her mind raced. Were they in an accident? Did someone attack them? Why were they unconscious? 1,000 questions filled her head, but there were no answers. The doors of the emergency room stayed closed. Nurses and doctors moved quickly inside, but no one looked at her. No one spoke to her. She was left in the dark, and the silence burned her soul. Then, heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. 2 police officers walked in. Their faces were serious, their eyes sharp. They didn't look like they came to comfort her. They looked like they came to deliver bad news. The young nurse's heart froze. She felt fear crawl up her spine. The taller officer looked at her, then at the doctor. He whispered something she could not hear. The doctor nodded and walked away. The officer turned toward her. His face was pale. His lips pressed into a thin line. He took a slow step closer. The nurse swallowed hard. Her throat was dry. She felt the air grow heavy. The officer's voice was quiet but firm. "Ma'am, we need to talk about what happened tonight." Her knees felt weak. The world spun around her. Her family was lying inside that room, unconscious and silent. Now the police were here with secrets in their eyes, and she knew her life was about to change forever. The emergency room doors slammed shut, and the young nurse was left standing alone in the hallway. The sharp click of the lock echoed in her ears like a warning. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her mind fighting against the silence. Inside that room were her husband, her sister, and her son. She could not see them. She could not touch them. She pressed her hand against the cold glass window of the emergency door, but the blinds were down. She could only hear muffled voices, the beeping of machines, and the sound of rushing footsteps. Every second felt longer than the last. The hallway was empty now, except for her. The lights above flickered, making the shadows stretch across the walls. She wrapped her arms around herself, but the chill in her body came from fear, not the air. Her mind screamed with questions. Why are they here? Why all 3? Were they in the same accident? How is that possible? She took a shaky step backward and leaned against the wall. Her legs felt weak. She was a nurse. She had seen countless emergencies. But never like this. This was her family, and this time she was locked out. Minutes crawled by. A clock on the wall ticked loudly, every sound like a hammer striking her nerves. Her eyes never left the door, hoping, praying, someone would come out with news. But no one did. Then, faint shadows moved behind the blinds. She squinted, trying to see. A doctor leaned over her husband. Another adjusted the wires connected to her sister. A nurse placed something over her son's face. But their movements were strange, hurried, almost desperate. The young nurse's heart thumped harder. She wanted to rush in, but she knew the door would not open. Rules were rules, even for her. Still, a question burned in her chest. Why are they treating my family like strangers? Why won't they tell me anything? Her breath caught when she saw something unusual. 4. A split second, she noticed her sister's hand move. Just a twitch. Just enough to make her step forward in shock, but then, silence again. The sliding doors at the far end of the hallway hissed open. 2 police officers stepped inside. The nurse froze. Their presence filled the space with heavy tension. They were not here for comfort. They were here for answers, answers she did not yet have. The taller officer's eyes met hers. Cold, steady, unreadable. The shorter one carried a file in his hand. They both looked tired, as if they had been dealing with something far worse than a normal accident. The taller one spoke softly. You are the nurse on duty tonight? Her lips trembled. I am. But those people inside, they are my family. For a moment, both officers stared at her. Their expressions darkened. She saw something in their eyes, fear. Not the fear of a difficult case. A deeper fear, the kind that people carry when they see something unnatural. Her stomach twisted. The shorter officer whispered to the taller one. His words were low, but she caught fragments. Strange scene, no signs, still alive. The nurse stepped forward, her voice sharp with desperation. Tell me. What happened to them? The taller officer took a slow breath. His eyes dropped to the floor before rising again. His voice was heavy. It wasn't a normal accident. Her pulse quickened. Then what was it? He shook his head slightly. We don't know yet. But we found something strange at the site. The air around her grew colder. Her body stiffened. The officer leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Whatever happened to your family, it wasn't human. Her knees almost gave out. She gripped the wall for support, and in that moment, she realized this was only the beginning of a nightmare she could not escape. The hallway felt heavier after the officer's whisper. The nurse's heart pounded in her chest like a drum. She stared at him, searching his face for more answers, but his eyes were distant. He had seen something he did not want to describe. Inside the emergency room, the faint beeping of machines rose and fell. Shadows moved behind the glass, but no one came out. Her family lay inside, trapped between life and something else. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to calm herself, but every breath grew sharper. The taller officer glanced at his partner, then back at her. He sighed and lowered his voice. We found your family in the same place. All of them together. No signs of a crash, no broken glass, no road damage. Just the car, standing there, like it had been dropped from the sky. The nurse blinked. Dropped from the sky? The officer nodded slowly. That's the only way I can explain it. The younger officer opened the file he carried. Black and white photographs slipped out. One showed the burned car, standing alone in the dark field. The ground around it was blackened, but the grass outside the circle was untouched. Another photo showed strange marks on the dirt, shapes like circles, overlapping and glowing faintly in the camera's flash. The nurse's fingers shook as she held the photos. "What is this?" she whispered. The younger officer hesitated. "We don't know. The patterns, they don't look natural. They don't look man-made either." Her head spun. She had studied medicine, not mysteries. But she knew one thing, nothing about this was normal. She wanted to scream, to run inside and grab her husband's hand, to hold her son close, to shake her sister awake. But she could not. The doors were closed, the blinds down, and the truth kept slipping further away. The taller officer's voice cut the silence again. "When we found them, they were already unconscious. No injuries. No blood. Just sleeping. But their bodies were cold, too cold for people still alive." Her eyes widened. "Cold? What do you mean cold?" "Like they had been left in the snow for hours," he said, his face dark. "But the night was warm." The nurse's lips parted, but no sound came out. She felt her chest tighten. The younger officer leaned closer. "There's something else." He opened another photo. It showed her husband's arm. Across the skin were marks, burn-like shapes. Long, thin handprints. Fingers too sharp, too stretched, too unnatural. Her stomach twisted, and she dropped the picture. It fluttered to the floor. The taller officer bent down, picked it up, and slid it back into the file. He gave her a long look. "We don't want to frighten you. But you need to prepare yourself." Whatever touched them was not human. The nurse staggered back, her hands clutching the wall. She wanted to deny it, to say this was impossible. But deep inside, she felt the truth creeping closer. Before she could speak, the emergency room alarms blared. A red light flashed above the door, and nurses rushed inside. The sound pierced through her ears, filling her chest with panic. She turned to the officers, but they said nothing. Their faces were pale, their eyes fixed on the closed door. The nurse whispered to herself, almost trembling, "Please, don't take them away from me." But the fear inside her whispered something darker. What if they're not the same anymore? The red alarm light slowly faded back to normal, but the nurse's heart did not calm. The emergency room was still locked, her family still hidden behind the glass. She stood frozen, her mind replaying the officer's words. Not human. The taller officer finally broke the silence. He opened the file again, his hand steady, but his eyes heavy with unease. He slid another photograph across the desk toward her. "You need to see this." The nurse hesitated, but her trembling fingers picked it up. The image showed her husband's bare arm. Across his skin were deep, burned impressions. They looked like fingerprints, but not human fingerprints. The fingers were too long, stretching unnaturally, ending in thin points. Her throat tightened. This isn't possible." The younger officer stepped closer. "We checked every angle. These are not marks from fire, not from rope, not from any tool. They look like hands. But no human hands are shaped this way." The nurse dropped the photo back on the desk. Her breathing grew fast. She turned away, pressing her palms to her face, but the image stayed in her mind. The taller officer continued, his voice low. "Your sister had them too. On her neck. And your son," he paused, swallowing hard. "Your son had no wounds. But his skin was icy, like he had been kept in a freezer. Yet he was still alive." Her knees buckled slightly. She leaned against the wall, trying to hold herself up. Alive, but touched by something unnatural, she forced herself to ask, her voice breaking, "Did anyone else see what happened?" The younger officer nodded. "We interviewed witnesses. A farmer near the field said he saw lights. Bright, white lights, moving in the sky. He thought it was lightning at first. But there was no storm." The nurse's eyes widened. Lights in the sky? She remembered stories she had once heard, rumors, whispers, but she had never believed them. Not until now, the taller officer's voice grew sharper. We don't want to scare you. But we have to be honest. There's something we can't explain. The car was found in the middle of a burned circle. Perfectly round. No tracks led in. No tracks led out. It was as if the car just appeared there. She stared at him in disbelief. Her body shook with cold, but the hospital air was warm. For a moment, silence filled the hallway. Only the ticking clock and the faint hum of machines could be heard. Then, from behind the emergency room doors, a loud crash echoed. Metal clattered to the floor. Nurses shouted. The young nurse jumped forward, her hand on the door. What's happening? But the door remained locked. Through the blinds, she saw a shadow shift unnaturally across the room. For a split second, it looked longer, taller than any human. Her blood froze. The younger officer rushed to the window, trying to peek through the small gap in the blinds. His jaw tightened. Something's wrong in there. The taller officer placed a firm hand on his gun. His eyes darkened, and he whispered, "Stay behind us." The nurse clutched her chest, her breath shallow. Her world was collapsing. Her family was inside that room, and something strange was moving with them. Her mind screamed only one thought: if they are alive, what else is alive with them? The hallway was filled with noise from inside the emergency room, shouts, hurried footsteps, the hiss of machines. The young nurse pressed her palms against the glass door, desperate to see. Her chest rose and fell quickly, every breath sharp like broken glass. Then, the sound inside suddenly softened. The shouting slowed. The machines beeped in steady rhythm. For a moment, it felt calm. Too calm, the blinds shifted slightly. Through a narrow gap, the nurse saw her sister lying on the bed. Pale. Weak. Still. But then, her lips moved, the nurse's eyes widened. She leaned closer to the glass, her heart pounding. Her sister's mouth trembled, and a whisper escaped. One word. Fragile, broken, but clear enough. The sound was so faint the nurse wasn't sure if she heard it with her ears or her soul. Her hand flew to the glass. What? What did you say? She shouted, her voice echoing in the hall. But before her sister could finish, the monitors screamed. The machines erupted in wild alarms. Doctors rushed around her bed, their movements frantic. Nurses pushed carts, shouting codes the young nurse couldn't understand. The doors stayed locked. She was still outside, helpless. The taller police officer cursed under his breath and stepped forward, slamming his hand against the door. Open it! He barked. But no one answered. The younger officer turned to the nurse, his face pale. What did she say? Did you hear her? The nurse swallowed hard, her voice trembling. She said, they. The word hung in the air like a shadow. Simple. Small. Yet terrifying. The taller officer's jaw clenched. He looked at his partner with a grim expression. She knows something. The younger officer nodded slowly. His voice was quiet. But who are they? The nurse's hands shook. Her mind raced. She thought of the strange marks, the burned circle, the lights in the sky. A chill SP. Read through her bones. She whispered to herself, almost afraid to speak it out loud, not human. Inside the room, the doctors worked furiously. The sound of paddles charging filled the air, sharp and electric. The nurse covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. Her sister's body jolted as the machine shocked her. Once. Twice, then, silence. The nurse froze. Was her sister gone? Suddenly, the sister's eyes opened. For a brief second, her gaze locked on the nurse through the gap in the blinds. Her eyes were wide with terror, her lips shaking as if fighting to form more words. The nurse pressed her face closer to the glass, whispering, "Please, tell me." But before any sound could come, doctors surrounded the bed, blocking the view. The blinds swung back down, shutting everything away. The taller officer pulled the nurse back. "You need to stay away," he said firmly. But his voice cracked. He was just as shaken as she was. The hallway returned to silence, but the word echoed again and again in her head. They. Who were they? What had her sister seen before losing consciousness? The nurse's body trembled. She realized the truth was close, too close. And whatever they were might already be inside this hospital. The word "they" refused to leave the nurse's mind. It circled inside her head like a curse. Her sister had spoken it with such fear, as if even saying the word was dangerous. The hallway was silent now, but it was not peaceful. It was the silence of waiting, of dread. The police officers stood nearby, their faces tense. The taller officer finally broke the silence. "You deserve to know what we found," he said. His voice was low, as if he feared someone else might be listening. The nurse turned to him, her eyes desperate. "Please, tell me." The younger officer opened his file again, pulling out fresh pages. "Your family wasn't the only case tonight. Others disappeared too. 3 people from the nearby town never made it home. Their cars were found empty, doors wide open, but no bodies inside." The nurse's heart sank. "Gone? Just gone?" He nodded. "Gone without a trace. And that's not the strangest part." The taller officer leaned closer, his words sharp. "People in the area reported lights in the sky. Bright white circles, moving fast, stopping without sound. Too low for planes, too slow for lightning." The nurse's hands tightened around her arms. She remembered stories she had once laughed at, stories of strange objects in the night sky. But no one was laughing now. The younger officer flipped to another photo. It showed a wide field, blackened in a perfect circle. The grass outside the circle was untouched, fresh and green. Inside, the earth looked dead. He pointed to the middle. "This is where your family's car was found. No tracks. No path in. No path out. It was just there." The nurse stared at the photo, her chest tight. "That's impossible." The taller officer's eyes darkened. "Exactly. Impossible." Her knees felt weak. She sat on the bench in the hallway, pressing her hands to her face. Her mind filled with questions she couldn't answer. Who had Ta? Ken, her family? Why bring them back alive? Why her husband, her sister, her son? The officers exchanged a glance, then the younger one said carefully, "There's one more detail. A farmer claims he saw figures near the car before we arrived. Tall figures. Thin. Moving slowly. But when he blinked, they were gone." The nurse's head jerked up. "Figures? People?" The officer shook his head. "Not people. He said they didn't walk like us. Their shapes were different." Her blood ran cold. She remembered the strange marks on her husband's arm. The long, thin fingers burned into his skin. Her body shivered. So it's true, something touched them. Something not human. For a moment, no one spoke. The hallway felt smaller, the lights above flickering as if the building itself was afraid. Then a sound cut through the silence. A soft, steady tapping. The nurse turned her head slowly. Her son's room was just beyond the glass. One small hand had slipped off the bed and now tapped against the metal rail. Tap! 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 She rushed toward the window, her breath catching. His eyes were still closed, but his fingers twitched unnaturally, stiff and jerky, as if controlled by invisible strings. The taller officer pulled her back. "Stay away!" But she couldn't look away. Her son's face was calm, too calm. His lips parted, and a cold breath escaped. The tapping stopped. The room went silent again. The nurse pressed her trembling hand against the glass. Her voice was barely a whisper. Please, bring them back to me. But deep inside, she feared the truth. Maybe her family had already been taken, and what returned was not truly them anymore. The hallway had grown too quiet. The nurse stood frozen against the glass, her eyes locked on her son's still body. The faint echo of the tapping sound seemed to linger in her ears, though his hand no longer moved. The taller officer's hand hovered near his weapon, his jaw tight. The younger officer looked pale, his eyes darting between the nurse and the emergency room door. Even without words, they all felt it. The air had changed. Heavy. Wrong, then it happened. Her son's chest rose, then fell, slowly. His lips parted. A faint mist left his mouth as though his breath was colder than the room around him. The nurse pressed her palms harder against the glass. He's waking up, she whispered, her heart leaping with hope and dread at the same time. The boy's eyelids fluttered. For a moment, the nurse thought she saw her son again, her little boy. But when his eyes opened fully, her hope shattered. They were glowing. Not the warm eyes of a child, but two orbs of unnatural light. Pale, silver, and unblinking, the nurse staggered back, a cry escaping her lips. No, no, this isn't real, the taller officer shouted, pulling his gun. Step back! Step back now! Inside the room, the boy slowly sat up. His movements were stiff, mechanical, like a puppet pulled by unseen strings. Wires and tubes slid from his body as if they no longer mattered. Beside him, the sister's body shifted. Her hand twitched, then her head turned sharply to the side. Her lips moved again, the same broken whisper. The nurse's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She slammed her fists against the glass. Stop! That's my family! Don't hurt them! But even she knew something was wrong. Something was no longer the same. Her husband's body stirred next. His chest rose with a deep, unnatural gasp. His eyes shot open, glowing the same silver light as her son's, the younger of. Pfizer cursed under his breath, stumbling back. This isn't possible! The lights above flickered wildly, the hallway plunging into flashes of darkness and brightness. Alarms wailed again, machines screeched. The hospital seemed alive, screaming with them. Through the glass, the nurse saw all three of her loved ones slowly rising from their beds. Not stumbling like patients. Not weak like survivors. But rising strong, steady, as if controlled by something else. The boy's glowing eyes turned toward the glass. He stared directly at her. For a moment, her breath caught. Was it her son? Was he still inside? Then his lips curled into a faint, unnatural smile. The nurse's body shook. She whispered, her voice breaking, "Please, come back to me." The boy tilted his head, as if listening. But the silence that followed was worse than any scream. The taller officer raised his weapon, his voice sharp with fear. Get back! They're not human anymore. The glass between them rattled as if struck by invisible force. The nurse screamed, covering her ears, and then, darkness, the lights went out. The alarm stopped. The hallway was swallowed in black. For a few seconds, nothing. Only breathing. Heavy. Unearthly. Close, the nurse opened her eyes wide, her heart racing, but she could see nothing. She whispered, trembling, "Where are they?" And from the darkness, a child's voice answered softly, her son's voice, but colder, sharper, "Alien, we are here."